Folks, we're still going to be talking about the Hisenior Mega5-EST for a while. It came out a couple of years ago at this point, but it's kind of one of the first IEMs with this new tuning style philosophy behind it, but it's also, frankly, still one of the best, but it's of course not that cheap. But now we've got the new Mega 7, and it is cheaper. But is this just a cheaper Mega 5? Well, hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the Mega 7, which is not the Mega 7-EST, it's just the Mega 7 flat. Basically, Mega is Hisenior's kind of their neutral tuning brand, I suppose, and the 7 indicates the number of drivers in here. This one's got one dynamic driver, 6 balanced armatures, and no ESTs, hence it's not the Mega 7-EST, it's just the Mega 7, and that's actually why I think the price is lower. This is coming in at $450 versus the $550 for the Mega 5-EST, so we're looking at a lower price point, a different driver configuration, but I'll tell you right now, the tuning philosophy here is very, very similar. But is it exactly the same? Well, the short answer is no, and exactly how different it is, well, that's what we're gonna talk about. But before we get into that, a quick shout out to Hisenior for sending the Mega 7 in for review. If you wanna check them out, of course, I'll have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go to the table. We'll talk about the packaging, what you get inside the box, physical form factor on these IEMs, fit and comfort, all that good stuff. Then, of course, we're going to talk about the sound and how these things compare to, I've got 4 other IEMs lined up here, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But to start with, here you go. Here is the packaging. It is Mega. Nice packaging. And inside that packaging is what you see here on the table, which is actually quite a bit. This is a lot of accessories. So let me move the IEMs to the side for a moment and just kind of highlight for you this little carry case, which we've seen with some other Hisenior IEMs. It still retains their Phoebos branding, which I believe that stands for Feel the Beauty of Sound, which is a little bit on the cringe side, but I'm also at the same point going to say that I miss it in a little bit. We'll get to that though. Apart from that, you also do get a microfiber towel, which has also got some Phoebos on it. Love to see it. You do get multiple sets of ear tips, which I also love to see. I'll just highlight these briefly. You do get 2 sets of foam ear tips. It looks like they're both the same size, but apart from that, you also get 2 different styles of silicone ear tips, and you get a lot of each of them. It's basically just large, medium, and small, but you get 2 sets of large, medium, and small. So 2 sets times 4. It's a lot of dang ear tips, and well, I like to see that. Although I will say, I don't think that either of these ear tips is the ideal ear tip for this IEM. We'll talk about that more when we talk about fit and comfort. You do also get a shirt clip, which I didn't plan to do that, but that was pretty cool. And then you do also get a spare set of filters. So if you ever need to replace the filters if they ever get clogged up, these sorts of little metal grills, I'll be honest, I've never had issues with these things getting clogged up, but I think it probably depends on, I suppose, your ear anatomy and what exactly is going on in your ear. So you get all that stuff. Anything else to highlight? Not really, except for the cable and this little accessory. So I guess I'll highlight this accessory first of all. The Mega 7 appears to only come in a 4.4 millimeter variant. I didn't see the option to buy a 3.5 on their website. So it comes with a 4.4 mil cable, but then it comes with this adapter, which then steps down the 4.4. Oh my gosh, that is very tight, down to a 3.5. And I am personally a big 3.5 mil guy, so I guess I would have used that apart from the fact that this is quite chunky, and I like 4.4 mil better than I like adapters like this. I'll just say that. So not a big fan of that adapter, but the cable itself is fine. So let's talk about the rest of the cable as we move into talking about the build quality on this IEM. Now this cable, I think they have a name for it. Is this the Orca? I don't know. I feel like they come up with names for their cables. And well, yeah, I don't know. I've seen some people ask me about this cable or just mention it in the comments. And I guess it is notable of sorts. It is kind of your standard, 4-core black braided cable, a little bit on the slightly heavyweight side, but not super heavyweight. So it's a little bit more than like a thin spindly cable. And then you'd see up here at the Y split, it's a pretty chonky little guy where it says Hisenior Audio, and you've got a chin slider that I'll say right now is actually functional. I appreciate this chin slider. I see you, Hisenior. But yeah, I'd say that the cable is a decent little cable on it. Nothing really special or stand out apart from the Y split being, I don't know, a little bit on the standout side. I will say that I don't love the shrink wrapped ear hooks up here. Not that I'm opposed to having ear hooks, just I feel like whenever it's like the shrink wrap on a black plastic cable like this, it always just looks a little bit cheap. And I think it does kind of look a little bit cheap here on this particular execution. But apart from that, it is a nicely behaved cable. You can see it is not particularly memory prone. It wraps well, even though it is maybe a little bit on the stiff side, just because it is, again, a little bit slightly heavyweight. But let's talk about the rest of this thing real quick. I guess I'll highlight briefly. It does terminate into a standard 2-pin connector with a slight protrusion on here, but there is no recess on the IEM itself. So it should be really easy to find replacement cables if you want to. And in fact, because I don't love 4.4, I actually ended up using a different cable, but your mileage may vary. Now let's talk about the earpieces, which here's where I'm gonna contradict myself, because when I reviewed the Mega5-EST, it was just kind of like gray and bland, and it said Phoebos on it, and I thought it was kind of weird, but I kind of miss it now. And I apologize for being so inconsistent, but this look I don't really love. I don't really like this logo that much. This is a logo we've seen on other Hisenior IEMs, at least the Hisenior Mega5-EST Base Plus Edition used this logo, and I don't really understand what's going on. Maybe that is an FB, maybe that is Phoebos. I'm not totally sure, but I don't know. I don't think it's very aesthetic, and then I don't, it's a generic glitter pattern on the outside, so not that interesting to look at. Although I will say the rest of the ear shell is quite well formed and quite well fitted, although it does actually fit a little bit, sorry, I was about to say smaller. It fits a little bit larger than the Mega5-EST, if you're familiar with that. I think mostly it's down here to the nozzle, which I found to be a little bit on the long side, which is why I mentioned I don't think that this thing comes with the right ear tips. The ear tips that work best for me, at least, are going to be a shorter flange ear tip, like this one right here. If anyone's curious, this is the NF Audio MS42 ear tip, which I know is just kind of a mess of letters and stuff like that, but it basically just shortens the overall package here, so I get a more comfortable fit, which I guess I'll demonstrate for you in a little bit. But yeah, just to highlight, they are a hollow resin shell as far as I can tell, and they're nicely made. They feel nice, and I wish that they would do something a little bit handsomer here on the outside. Phoebos was fine. I think Phoebos was a little bit better than this. But anyway, let's throw these things into my ear, and I'll talk about the fit and comfort. So, I mean, I've already kind of mentioned that they are a little bit long on the nozzle. Once I dialed in the ear tip, I don't have any issue with the nozzle length. I think these things are actually quite comfortable. They're very well fitted to my ear. As you can see, they've got a little catch over here that falls behind the antitragus, so fit stability is actually fantastic on these earphones. They're very comfortable, kind of all day listen, and they're gonna stay stable even when you're doing things like aggressive sleeping, which is what I do every night. That said, because the nozzle is a little bit on the long side, it was maybe not the most comfortable sleeping IEM until, again, I dialed in the ear tip, and I think this is a decently comfortable sleep now. But yeah, in terms of size, I would say it's kind of medium size. It's not particularly small, not particularly large. It's not stretching out my ear. I'm comfortable with this earphone in my ear all day long, and it is nice and stable, which I appreciate. So there you go. Build quality is down. Let me just check my notes, make sure there's nothing I missed. But I guess here, actually, briefly, I will measure the nozzle. I keep forgetting to measure the nozzle. You guys should remind me in the comments when I fail to measure a nozzle. Just let me know. Hey, a little nudge, big bro. Measure that nozzle. I'm a nozzle peeper. So let's check it out. We are zeroed out. Let's remove that and let's see what we're looking at. I mean, I can say the ear, it feels pretty normal, probably about a 6 mil. There you go. About a 6.1 mil, and that is at the wide part. You can see that there is a bit of a lip, so it will hold on ear tips. In fact, I would say this thing held on to ear tips maybe even a little bit more aggressively than normal. So that was good. But yeah, there you go. There's the physical form factor. So let us talk now about the sound here on the Mega7, not EST. I gotta stop myself from saying that. I'm so used to saying Megafest for the past year and a half. But anyway, here's the frequency response of the Mega7. If you want to take a look at this for yourself, it's up on Squiglink, linked in the description down below. You can compare it to literally hundreds of other earphones that I have measured on my same rig, but of course we're going to talk about it together before I get into talking about more of my subjective listening impressions. And what you can see here is, of course, we're looking at very neutral plus a bass boost, all right? This is kind of what you should expect from a Hisenior Mega IEM. I mentioned that the branding of Mega they use for describing their natural neutral sound signature, but of course they're throwing in a bass boost here because the people want bass, and I don't blame them necessarily. But yeah, you've got a really clean mid-range, maybe a little bit of a dip here at let's say 150 hertz, I'm not going to say that I hear this half a decibel dip. But what I will say is that it does end up sounding a little bit contrastier and a little bit, yeah, just a little bit contrastier versus what you might have heard with the Mega5-EST, all right? So the mid-range generally pretty neutral, maybe a little bit of an elevation here too. This is actually probably contributing to more of that contrast, although the Mega 5 has also got a bit of a boost here. So I don't know. I'm just gonna say right now, squig-wise, this looks a lot like the Mega5-EST. Sound-wise, there's definitely similarities, but there's also gonna be some things that are different. We'll talk about that in the direct comparison. But just to highlight, this is basically, we're looking at neutral mid-range, maybe a little bit of brightness here and kind of like the lower treble and very well extended treble. Maybe even a little bit on the shimmery side, more up in the higher treble registers, which is where you may or may not be sensitive to. I personally am not usually that sensitive to the upper treble shimmer stuff, but that is the frequency response. Let's talk about how this thing actually sounds to my ear. And again, it's hard not to compare it to the Mega5-EST, but it does sound different. I would say in comparison, I don't know if I want to do this right now. Let me save the comparison for the direct comparison. Let's just say that as kind of like a new meta-ish tuning frequency response on this thing, it sounds a little bit contrastier and just a little bit denser sounding than maybe some others. But I don't know, it's actually honestly pretty in line with what to expect from like even like the Hisenior Meta, I think has like kind of a similar sound signature, at least to the overall tonal balance. This isn't quite as contrasty maybe as the Meta, but it's pretty similar. And so I would say it's a little bit more contrasty than something like the Daybreak. And if you haven't heard all these, and I'm just saying the word contrasty over and over again, I apologize, but let me put it in some other terminology. It does sound relatively neutral, natural. It has like kind of like a richness to it, like almost like a downward tiltedness to the sound signature, just ever so slight. So it does come across, I don't want to say it sounds dark, but again, it's just, there's that contrastiness about it that makes it sound less of like this mid-range forward kind of open sound and a little bit more kind of closed in. In terms of like more of like the technical terminology, I'll say right here, the bass on this thing is, I think, a little bit tighter than we got on the Mega5-EST, but it's still not the tightest of bass. It's a little bit too much bass, I suppose, but I'm sure there's other parts of the frequency response that are playing a role in terms of my perception of the bass. But I'll just say that the attack on the bass is not particularly precise. It's decent. It's not like smudgy and like blurring the mid-range or anything like that. It's not like so much bass that it's gonna become a problem, but it also still doesn't have quite the tactility behind it that some other IEMs have that I'll talk about in a little bit. In terms of like the top end, I'll say that, again, there's maybe a little bit of a shimmer in kind of the upper treble emphasis, but it was nothing that I found to be fatiguing or a problem. In fact, if anything, it just kind of added a nice sense of texturing to the mid-range, which overall I would say that the Mega7 is actually a really well-textured earphone. It, again, has this contrastiness about it, but it doesn't quite get to the point of it sounding crunchy ever. Which means that, yeah, I generally found it to be pretty smooth, maybe even almost a little bit featureless, for better or worse, right? If you're looking for something that is neutral, that is more like a monitor, you probably want something more featureless. But if you're looking for something more engaging and exciting, I don't know that the Mega7 is necessarily going to deliver that. It's just like a really competently tuned earphone that does a whole lot right, doesn't really do a whole lot wrong, but also isn't necessarily going to wow you in any way. And I think that's kind of the point. But if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're looking for. Okay, let me see if there's anything else to talk about in my notes. Not really. Yeah, I don't know. Generally, just a nice sounding earphone. But like I promised, we're going to bring in the Mega5-EST, the one that started it all for comparison. Here you go. Just to also highlight. Remember I complained about this thing being gray and saying Phoebos on it? It kind of looks better though, doesn't it? I'll be honest. But anyway, in terms of sound comparisons, again, I've alluded to them a little bit, but overall, the Mega7 sounds more contrasty, like slightly more V-shaped in terms of its frequency response, whereas the Phoebos, the Mega5, it sounds softer. It sounds a little bit more mid-range forward, a little bit more breathy. And I think because of that, like, I find that it has a little bit more character about it. Maybe slightly more of a colored sound. I don't know. They're both kind of colored in their own way, but it's just a little bit more mid-rangey, a little bit more vocal focused. And for me personally, I like that. Now, I will say that the bass on the Mega 5 has never been like the strength of it, and I think it is, okay, it's the weakest part of the Mega 5. And I think that the bass on the Mega 7 is a little bit tighter. It is a little bit more controlled and a little bit less pillowy and kind of poofy in its attack. That said, it's still not like fantastic bass. And so I think between these two earphones, they're both really good. I would be happy to listen to my entire music library on either of them, but I think that the Mega 5-EST is just gonna engage me more with more of that vocal reproduction, whereas the Mega 7 is gonna be a little bit more reserved, I suppose, in that regard. Just again, a little bit more down tilted, a little bit less vocal forward. And because of that, well, I'm a vocal guy. So I personally would take the Mega 5. What's another earphone we can bring in for comparison? Here's one that's on the other side of the price gap. So at $450, this one is, I believe, $330. This is the ZGOT Horizon, for anyone who is not familiar. And you could almost even describe these as like a scale, right? Where you have kind of like this vocal forward, kind of open soundingness to it, whereas the Mega 7 adds a little bit more contrast, a little bit more crunch to it. And the Horizon, I think, is maybe just kind of like a next step of a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more dense about its sound signature. But I actually, I went from here saying I like this one better to this one not liking it quite as much, because again, it's just maybe lacking a little bit something special. I feel like you go a little bit further, the Horizon gains back a little bit of that something special. It sounds different. It sounds a little bit denser, but also I feel like the vocal, like it just kind of hits like a next level of contrast, I suppose. I don't know what's going on in my ear. But it ends up just making it sound like a wider presentation, a stronger sense of separation between the instruments. And the vocal timbre really just comes through fantastic for me on the Horizon. I think the bass is also maybe just slightly better than what you get on the Mega 7. Neither of these have like fantastic bass, but I do think that the Horizon's bass is a little bit tighter on the presentation and probably a little bit more colored in the upper treble, but I don't mind that personally. If you're really sensitive to upper treble, you might actually prefer the Mega 7, even though it does have a bit of shimmer to it. The Horizon is fairly aggressive up there, and probably also part of why I'm a little bit drawn to it. So there is that. What else can we talk about? Of course, the Soft Ears Volume S, also coming in cheaper at $320 US, I believe. And this is going to be much more of a mid-range forward sound signature, kind of similar to the Mega 5-EST, but the bass is less pillowy here on the Volume S. It's just got like a tighter, really impactful bass response. Okay, it's not actually the tightest of bass. I'll say this, it is a little bit still on the mid-bassy side, but it's more like the physicality behind it is really engaging and exciting. Also, the treble on the Volume S is kind of on the relaxed side. It doesn't really come across to me as dark, but when I'm listening to it in direct comparison with these other earphones, right, these ones have, again, a bit of that shimmer to the upper treble that can make, you know, things like hi-hats and stuff sound really metallic in a nice, realistic, transparent way. The Volume S doesn't have quite that emphasis, but it still does a really good job with the timbre of those hi-hats. So whereas with some other earphones that are relaxed on the upper treble, I'll find them to sound a little bit dull and even maybe plasticky in those types of percussive instruments. I feel like the Volume S really just never has that problem. They did a really good job with the treble tuning on this. And overall, it just ends up being a little bit more like kind of in-your-face vocals, a little bit more, yeah, just forward sounding, which again, I love. A little bit more textured in that regard too. But it's less maybe textured in the rest of it, which, oh my gosh, what am I even talking about? Just because this does come across, again, not quite crunchy, but it does have a nice sense of contrast and texture to it. But I think the vocal specifically, like just like the breathiness of the vocal is what really comes across for me on the Volume S and why I love this earphone so much. Okay, up to this point, I'll just say we've been describing, like all these earphones are all kind of in the same ballpark of tuning. This last one is gonna be the most different of the bunch. This is the Moondrop Cross Clinical Dusk. And this is gonna be much more of like a clinical, kind of like clean, it's not really neutral, but like to my ear, it sounds like kind of natural, almost monitor-like, but it has much more of an open, again, kind of like a vocal-centric sound about it, whereas the Mega 7 ends up sounding a little bit dense and a little bit reserved in the vocals. I think the imaging is kind of next level here on the Dusk. And, you know, I guess I didn't really talk too much about the imaging on the Mega 7. It is decent. Like, it's got a really good sense of separation and delineation and clarity between instruments, but everything just sounds a little bit kind of more congealed and like toward the center of the stereo image, whereas something like the Dusk really indexes high for spreading that image out and giving it a nice sense of width. Now, what I'll also say that I love about the Dusk is how tight and impactful the bass is. It's not as much bass as what we're gonna get on basically any of the other earphones that we talked about in terms of especially like the mid bass, but it still does a fantastic job of giving you just a really sharp attack on bass. So the kick drums, bass guitars and stuff, they're just really, really well defined on the Dusk in a way that it really does bring out kind of the limitations of the bass on especially the Mega 7 and the Mega 5-EST. Well, and even frankly, all of them. The bass is just kind of next level here for me on the Dusk. Although, again, if you're looking for a lot of bass, it might be the one that leaves you the most wanting because it's a little bit lean there. But overall, again, I'm still going to prefer the Dusk for my personal preferences, but hopefully the way that I've described it here will let you decide for yourself which of these. They're both fantastic earphones. This one's just going to be more engaging and exciting, whereas this one's just going to be kind of like more... just like it's hard to critique. Like this is not going to offend anybody. This one might offend some people, I'll be honest. And I know some people that it offends. But anyway, I think that's going to do it for my thoughts here on the Hisenior Mega 7. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to give this thing a very solid 3 stars out of 5, which for me, 3 means it's good to very, very good. And I think this one is very, very good. If you want to, let's see, what should I say? Is it just the Mega 5-EST, but cheaper? No, I think it does sound different. It doesn't have the ESTs, so that's probably why the price is lower, but it has some knock-on effects for what I actually hear in my ear. Even though you look in the frequency response graph, there's a lot more similarities than differences. They do sound different. This is a little bit less vocal focused, a little bit more dense, a little bit more kind of tight and packed up, but also just a little bit less open and mid-rangey as the Mega 5. But if that sounds interesting, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below, and I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.